So let's rewind just a little bit and think back to what we did in year 7. We talked about the two main tiers of storage in year 7, primary and secondary. We also learned about how the CPU processes instructions in what's called the fetch, decode, execute cycle. Today, our overall big question is still, what is a computer? And today, our focus is going to be on why computers need primary storage in the first place. By the end of this lesson, we're going to understand that primary storage, like RAM, is crucial because it's where the CPU quickly grabs the instructions it needs to run programs. And without primary storage, the CPU would have to constantly pull information from the much slower secondary storage, like your hard drive, which would make our computers painfully slow. This lesson will show you how important primary storage is in allowing the CPU to fetch instructions quickly, making sure your computer runs as fast as it can. When we talk about primary storage and secondary storage, in today's lesson, I'm just going to concentrate on the fact that primary storage is RAM and secondary storage is a hard disk drive. They can have different devices, but those are normally the traditional two that we're speaking about. Primary storage, first and foremost, is something called volatile. It's a device that loses data when there's no power. Basically speaking, if anything is stored on that device while the computer is on, it will stay there. But as soon as you turn your computer off or switch the power off, anything that was in primary storage before gets wiped away. Secondary storage, however, is non-volatile, which means that it keeps data even if you turn the power off, which is good because, well, if we've wanted to save an image that we've taken or that we wanted to save a file, we'd need it to be non-volatile so we can keep hold of it while the computer is off. Primary storage also has a really small capacity, meaning that it doesn't really hold much data. RAM is currently measured in gigabytes, and we're looking at around about 8 or 16 gigabytes, and some high-end computers may have 32 gigabytes, whereas secondary storage has a really large capacity. We're talking terabytes of data. It's the difference between having stuff on your desk to having things stored in a big cupboard. So if secondary storage is non-volatile, which means that it keeps data when there's no power, and secondary storage also has a much higher capacity, well, you might be thinking, what's the point in primary storage? Well, it all comes down to just one thing, and that is the need for speed. Secondary storage is super slow. And everything about speed in computer science is going to be a good thing. We want our programs to open up really quickly. We want our files to save quickly. It's all about how quickly the CPU can fetch instructions. And the fact is that the CPU can fetch instructions from primary storage much faster than secondary storage. And we also know that the CPU does, well, billions of instructions per second. If the CPU had to fetch these instructions from secondary storage, it would slow everything down so much. Fetching instructions from primary storage is just much, much faster. Secondary storage holds all the software and instructions when the computer's, well, turned off, right? It can't be in primary storage because it's volatile. What happens is when we double click on a piece of software, like Microsoft Edge or Teams or whatever, is that the instructions for it move from secondary storage to primary storage. And that is where the CPU fetches those instructions from. So, which one keeps data when there is no power? That is, of course, secondary storage. It's non-volatile. Primary storage is volatile. Primary storage also has a really low capacity, whereas secondary storage has a high capacity. You can store more in it. But, bottom line, the CPU can fetch instructions from primary storage over 100 times faster than secondary storage. And when you're fetching billions of instructions per second, that makes a big difference. So, can everybody turn and talk about this? There are some gaps in here that you need to fill out. I'll give you 30 seconds. Turn and talk. Go. So the reason computers need primary storage is because the CPU can fetch instructions from primary storage just much faster than secondary storage. It makes our computers run faster. So to recap, primary storage is volatile. Data is lost when there's no power. It stores instructions for software when they are currently in use. And it's very quick for the CPU to fetch instructions from. Secondary storage is non-volatile. Data is kept when there's no power. It stores instructions for software when not in use, but it is very slow for the CPU to fetch instructions from. Now you still might be thinking, well, why can't we go the other way? Why can't primary storage just be made non-volatile? Well, the fact is that you can't. Primary storage is so fast to work with for the CPU, and it's just also really, really expensive. Anything that's fast in computer science is just expensive. Secondary storage isn't. So that's why we temporarily store everything in secondary storage until we need it. As soon as we do need it, we move it into primary storage.